Welcome to the Vortex.
Welcome to the Vortex. I'm Gillian Symonds, and I'm very happy to have here with me today Marisol Caballero, the intern minister of Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Church. She's also serving at Troop Church this year as an intern minister. I'm a member of the Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Church. I've been a member since 1991. And one of Maddie's sermons that she gave just a couple of weeks ago really intrigued me. The title of it was Mary, Mary, Quite Revolutionary, and it's about La Virgen de Guadalupe. Not often that we hear about the divine feminine in the Unitarian Church, so it was a highlight of the sermon year. And I've invited her here today to talk a little bit about how she came to write that sermon, and also to talk about her early childhood connections to the Virgen as she grew up as a Unitarian Universalist. But the Virgin of Guadalupe spoke to her. Can you tell us a little bit about your first encounter with the Virgin?
Well, it was before my memory. I hear this story from my mom, who tells me that as an infant, a very young infant, before I was even turning my head much on my own or looking at people directly or following noises too much, that she had this statue, little under a foot high, of the Virgen on her dresser and in the bedroom. And when she'd carry me into the room, I would just crane my little neck to follow her, and we just had this fixed gaze upon one another, and everyone who would visit our house would remark how weird it was that this tiny baby was just staring at this statue of the Virgin. And people would often say that it looked as if I was communicating with her in some strange way. And my mom loves that story because as a Latina as well, it's the Virgin of Guadalupe is really important to her life, and she believes that she protects us as a mother. And so hearing that story once again, and then I think somehow, I don't quite remember, when I was working on, about a month before I started writing that sermon, I had a dream, and I don't quite remember the details of it, but there were so many things lining up that were pointing me towards writing about and spending some time studying and preaching about the Virgin of Guadalupe that I just felt that I was being pulled in that direction. I felt that I needed to tell her message.
And there was also another important demarcation time too, December 12th, I think you mentioned.
Yes.
A little bit later in your life. What was that?
Yes, so December 12th is the Catholic feast day for La Virgen de Guadalupe. And not being Catholic, I didn't really know that until a few years later when I was flipping through the channels, and I love mariachi music. So I think on one of the Spanish networks they had the celebration for the feast day, and there was this concert of all these various mariachi musicians. And so I tuned in, and that's when I realized, oh, December 12th, that's the feast day for the Virgen of Guadalupe. That's also the day, December 12th, 2005, that I met my partner, Chanel. So we've been together over 4 years, a little over, and so I just think it's very cool how this goddess that I always had this affinity for and have always thought is just so beautiful. And I've always loved her story, and she's a repeating theme in my life. And this is the day I met my partner.
How beautiful.
So I love to say that she introduced the two of us. So.
Wow. A wonderful interception there. Well, you said that you also have an affinity for the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Would you tell us or inform us about that story from its very beginnings in Mexico?
Sure. Well, during the Spanish conquest of Mexico, there was a lot of oppression of the Aztec people, the indigenous people of the region, and many of them were forced to convert. and oftentimes violently coerced into Catholic conversion and forced to change their names, adopt the Spanish language, forget their culture, basically their gods, their customs, their city, their families were sometimes being all taken from them. And so for those who went along as means of survival and converted, there was something missing until the Virgin appeared, as the story goes, to Juan Diego, which was his Catholic name. He was a peasant, an Aztec man, and he was walking along the hill one day, and the hill where a big shrine to an Aztec goddess was, had been destroyed already.
She was the corn goddess?
She was. Mm-hmm. And so she appears, the Virgin of Guadalupe, to him, and he couldn't believe his eyes, and she addressed him as, introduced herself as the Mother of God, and told him to, on her behalf, go beseech the bishop to have a shrine, not a shrine, but a cathedral built to her on that site. And this was holy ground for the Aztec people, the ground where a goddess of theirs had been worshipped for many years. And not only did she appear to him, she chose him out of all of the Europeans that were there. She chose an indigenous person. But not only did she choose this person, she appeared looking like the indigenous people. She had indigenous facial features. She had dark skin. Her cloak was filled with, and I get goosebumps telling the story, with astrological images that a peasant, an Aztec man of those times would have recognized as, oh, she's one of us. And he goes to the bishop and he says, this is what I saw, and this is what she said, this is what we have to do. And of course, scared for his life, he's approaching a powerful man. He gets turned away, dismissed as a dreamer, and he goes back, sees her again. Same thing happens 3 times. And on the 3rd time, the bishop, sick of this guy, says, well, yeah, bring me proof. So he does. He goes back and he's filled with anguish. He's probably thinking, why me? Why am I given this task? Mm-hmm. Take this from me. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do this for you anymore. And she says, here, behind me are a field of roses. Take those to the bishop and that will be proof. He goes and gathers the roses. These aren't just any roses. These are Castilian roses from the hometown area, maybe not the hometown, but the region where the bishop was from in Spain, that could not possibly grow in that climate of Mexico, and were not brought there. They weren't around. And he gathers them in his cloak, his tilma. He goes to the bishop and unfolds his cloak. The roses fall to the floor, and the bishop falls to his knees. For on the cloak is the image, as he had described her. It's perfectly displayed. And that's the image that we have today of La Virgen de Guadalupe. Mm-hmm. So within 12 days or so, a temporary chapel was built on that site. The bishop was won over. And then several years later, a gorgeous cathedral is there. And now to this day in Mexico City, you can go and view Juan Diego's actual cloak. And somehow, and it's behind glass, somehow it has survived decay. It hasn't broken down. The elements, for years it wasn't even behind glass. I've never made the trip